The battle to control America's most destructive species, feral pigs. A layer of frost clings to the grass on the morning Tony DeNicola sets out to check his trap. It's late January in South Carolina. The sun is rising, the fog is lifting, and the frogs are croaking from somewhere in the dark loblolly pines. In a whisper, DeNicola explains what will happen. "I wait for them to tire themselves out and then start tipping them over," he says, shifting a loaded rifle from his shoulder and cautiously approaching a clearing in the forest beside a small cattle ranch. DeNicola is a Yale-educated ecologist with the build of a wrestler, the jawline of a G.I. Joe, and a talent for making destructive species disappear. Most of the time, he runs a small non-profit that does the dirty work of curtailing overabundant wildlife in national parks and quiet East Coast neighborhoods. But he came south from Connecticut to tackle America's most destructive and seemingly unsolvable wildlife problem, the invasive feral hog. Over centuries, this adaptable, omnivorous creature has rooted its way from Florida to Kansas, inundated Texas and California, and recently has been banging for entry at the northern border of Montana. Today, there are between 6 and 9 million hogs running wild across at least 42 states and 3 territories. The exact number is difficult to pin down, and the estimated cost of the damage they cause, probably about $2.5 billion annually, according to the US Department of Agriculture, is likely an underestimate. In their relentless march across the country, pigs plow through crops, tear up roads and infrastructure, spread disease and elbow native species out of fragile marshes, riversides, grasslands, and forests. Many researchers consider them the most destructive invasive species on the planet. Stacked against other invasive species, DeNicola says, hogs are like a neutron bomb compared to a conventional bomb. Landowners, sport hunters, and wildlife managers have deployed all manner of technology and weaponry to keep feral hogs from wreaking havoc. Despite grenade launchers and airborne assault rifles, remote-controlled snares, and illegal poisons, the pig has persisted. To DeNicola, their success is proof that the old ways of managing wildlife are out of step with the modern world. A professional who kills with icy efficiency in the name of conservation, he's caught between animal rights activists who abhor the killing of any animal and recreational hunters who don't want to lose a favourite quarry. His trap is a novel design that's so simple, he can't believe it took 20 years for him to invent. "This trap is going to blow everything else away," he says. "It would cost billions to hire people to manage hogs, but this model will help people manage it themselves." As he comes within earshot of the muddy clearing this chilly morning, there are no panicked squeals or agitated grunts. The bait corn is mostly gone, and there are hundreds of hoof prints frozen in the mud, but they belong only to deer. He's frustrated, but not flustered. He has spent more time studying hogs, their feeding, mating, social behaviour, and the way different-sized bullets pass through them, than he'd like to admit. He knows they'll come. Pigs in America. No pig or any other member of the swine family, Suidae, which includes warthogs, Russian boar, and domestic pigs, is native to the Western Hemisphere. Those found here today trace their lineage back to a wild boar that likely evolved in Southeast Asia and was imported to the Americas over centuries. Their arrival on the North American continent involved a who's who of early colonization. Christopher Columbus stocked the West Indies with domestic pigs to feed his Grand Fleet in 1493. They reproduced so quickly that the Spanish crown ordered their population reduced just 12 years later. In 1539, Hernando de Soto brought more than 300 swine along on his murderous 3,000-mile march around North America. Along the way, his pigs escaped into the countryside and were traded to native people. Later, colonists raised their hogs free range, letting them loose on the land to fend for themselves. Feral pigs spread across the US. The USDA estimates that between 6 and 9 million feral pigs roam the United States, causing more than $2.5 billion in agricultural damage annually. First introduced to North America by colonists in the 16th century as a food source, feral pigs have exploded in number in recent decades due to their adaptability and value to hunters. Ecologists, wildlife managers, and farmers have used a range of tactics to combat their spread, none of which have made a significant difference. In the mid-19th century, millionaire hunting aficionados imported purebred Eurasian wild boar to hunting reserves in New Hampshire, North Carolina, California, and Texas. These large and aggressive pigs were favoured, like largemouth bass, for the fight they put up. By the 1980s, many state game departments were stocking hogs to create a public hunting resource. As domestic pigs escaped captivity and interbred with wild animals over the centuries, America's feral swine developed into the motley bunch we know today. They have few natural predators and move in familial groups called sounders that range in size from a handful to a few dozen members. Like domestic pigs, they learn quickly, maintain complex social relationships, can choose to resolve conflicts without violence, and seem to understand what they see in a mirror. Related, this species of wild pig knows how to use tools. Generally stout and barrel-chested, most weigh less than 300 pounds and are covered in coarse hair. Both males and females grow tusks, which can reach over 19 inches and can loop around to puncture the jaw, if they're not worn down by rooting. Rooting is also their most destructive behaviour. Pigs drive their snouts and tusks into the ground and, like stubby-legged bulldozers, plough through crops, soil, forest floor and golf green. They do it in search of grubs or acorns to eat, to cool off on summer days, to communicate, and, as far as scientists can tell, for the sheer joy of it. In the wake of a sounder, a newly planted field can resemble no man's land on the Eastern Front, gutted in a network of trenches and craters several feet deep. Damage and destruction. The afternoon after finding his trap empty, DeNicola drives south to the sloping coastal plain of the Low Country to share a prototype with Corin Bowers, the 37-year-old mayor of Estill, population 3,282. Bowers' family arrived in what are now the Carolinas about a century after the pigs, and like his father, he grows peanuts, corn and cotton on 2,500 acres. He estimates that wild hogs cost him around $10,000 in damages each year. More than 1 million acres of South Carolina are tilled for field crops. And while farmers here have long battled drought, flood, and deer, they now find their fattening hordes of pigs as well. To slow the animals' advance, DeNicola aims to put as many of his traps as possible into their hands. We don't get to plant this anymore because hogs will completely devastate this ground, Bowers says, pointing to a barren field. At one time, this 25-acre plot was thick with peanuts, but sitting less than 10 miles from the Savannah River, it's vulnerable. When the river floods, hogs escape uphill into crops, and when it dries to a trickle, they come to wallow in the puddles left by irrigation. Ruts caused by their rooting can sink a tractor and destroy expensive equipment, including the long sprayers that irrigate wide fields. Your sprayer will be riding along, and next thing you know, you can't see it because it's hit a hole, Bowers says. New equipment can cost Wild hogs stick close to river valleys, but South Carolina farmers noticed an uptick in activity on their fields following a government program that boosted peanut production. In response, many have switched to other crops, but the pigs keep coming. On peanuts, they're terrible. On corn, they're terrible. They won't nip the tips off of cotton like deer do, Boar says, but they'll plough over rows of 4-foot cotton plants in search of the salt in fertilizer. We haven't been able to find a crop that feral swine won't eat, says Stephanie Schwiff, a research economist with National Wildlife Research Center. Pork choppering, tracking dogs, and the pig brig in turn, Americans kill pigs at an astonishingly vicious pace. After white-tailed deer, feral pigs are the most popular big game animal in North America, though existing patchy data hardly bear out the true extent. In 2019, South Carolina hunters reported killing 31,508 hogs while pursuing deer. There is no record of the scads of others that were hunted and trapped deliberately.